Oh, that's really original. How did you come up with that?
Fascinated by like stuff like that.
No, that's good.
You ever do Dorothy?
I did not. I did a lot of like there's this character Raggedy Ann, and then just like random like a witch or a skeleton. Nothing super cool. Oh, this year I was a crazy cat lady, but that's what I was last year. That's kind of just being myself. I actually own everything, so I don't have to run.
Well, there you go.
They just signed this guy from the Saints, Joe.
That is so cool. That is so original.
She had like Soto in the basket.
Oh, that is adorable. Are they really big fans? Halloween is like, I mean, it still is like my favorite. Yeah.
The team that's on the field feels good. Yourself. Thank you. Those was telling John that Braden's signed two receivers, one of them named is Joe Morgan.
Yeah, I mean, I guess the kids in our neighborhood are a little young, but I was cool to see some kind of, I mean, by mine, it's just years ago, it's like a real big Trump or
Right.
something. You know, like
Yeah.
or like a Bernie Sanders, or like
Whatever's
a
last.
American.
Yeah,
A lot of
these
power.
are like depleted, practice guys. Is Pitta even, is he
Yeah, really. You got the gold post like right here.
Yeah, I know, being original.
Last time we did it, you had passion too, he just jumped up in the end zone.
Yeah, my friends and I at the Nationals team have this yeah, Night of the Living Center. It's fun. It's like they have music and people drink their beer and holding a beer, looking at people watch. Yeah. And the weather was nice.
They target, he targeted one guy was holding him, the other guy came in and held it down.
They did between the two of them.
Unless you're Gronkowski, he takes it too. They're not tall enough to get into his head. They take a beat. I mean, because he puts his head down.
You should watch it.
It's realistic.
Football. Yeah, the Bettis one is really good. I have seen the Joe Green one is pretty good too. Yeah, they've been running them. They were running they run like the Steelers back to back. The Bettis one is actually really good. I mean, they get through. You don't roll on it.
Yeah, I do.
Yeah, and the coach came, new coach.
Sure.
Well, thanks for being here. I'm Jeff Flake, the other senator from Arizona. But glad to be here with Senator McCain. You all will have the report that we're issuing on paid patriotism. We started investigating this in the spring when we came across a contract with the New York Jets outlining certain activities that were to be compensated for by the taxpayer. We thought it didn't sound right, and so we went to the Pentagon and asked them to provide information, and it was like pulling teeth, and we're still not convinced that we have all the information so far. But ultimately, we were given a number of contracts that the DOD has with these sports teams, and a good number of them, 76 or 72, I believe, out of 122 contracts had some form of paid patriotism included in them. But about a third of those contracts we had to discover on our own. They weren't given to us by DOD. Keep in mind, the NFL teams, NBA teams, all these major league sports teams do a lot of good work for the military, a lot of good work that dwarfs anything in these contracts. What is upsetting is that when you see activities like this that people assume when they go to games are paid for out of the goodness of their heart by the owners and the teams, then to find out the taxpayer is paying for it, it kind of cheapens the whole lot. And that's simply not right. Also, with the Pentagon, when they say that there's no fat to cut anywhere, when you look into these marketing contracts and find activities like this that are being paid for, it makes you question that as well. So we understand now that the Department of Defense has said that they are putting an end to paid patriotism. Senator McCain and I included a provision in the NDAA, which will soon go to the President, hopefully to be signed this time, that stops the practice as well. So, and the NFL has responded saying that they will do an audit and to make sure that this is not happening as well. So we're pleased at that outcome. Senator McCain.
Well, I want to thank my friend Senator Flake for working diligently to uncover the extent of this Paid for Patriotism Act that has been going on for some period of time. And as my colleague Senator Flake pointed out, that we're all enthusiastic when we see our men and women who are serving in uniform honored at various sporting events. And we are very grateful for that. Unfortunately, thanks to in-depth investigations, a lot of that patriotism is paid for. In fact, as much as $6.8 million that we saw the Department of Defense spend on sports marketing contracts since 2012. They obviously should not be doing this. We appreciate if they honor the men and women in uniform, but not to get paid for it. And we could only account for 62% of the 122 contracts and 70% of the more than $10 million it actually spent. A couple of examples was $49,000 to the Milwaukee Brewers for the Wisconsin Army National Guard to sponsor each Sunday performances of God Bless America. DOD paid $1,500 to the LA Galaxy to provide pregame recognition of 5 high-ranking officers of the Air Force and 100 general admission tickets. The game Department of Defense paid $20,000 to the New York Jets to recognize 1 to 2 New Jersey Army National Guard soldiers as hometown heroes at each game. The Air Force paid the Cincinnati Bengals nearly $5,000 for 60 club-level tickets. The National Guard paid the Indianapolis Colts for the use of a luxury suite. The National Guard paid the Boston Bruins for a luxury box for 18 people and an executive view suite for 25 people on Military Appreciation Night. I want to point out that unfortunately more than a third of the contracts that we uncovered were not provided by the Department of Defense. The Department of Defense dragged their feet every step of the way. Senator Flake and I put in the Defense Authorization Bill, which I am confident will be signed by the President of the United States, prohibiting these activities. Now I think it would be entirely appropriate for the sports teams that were provided these fundings of taxpayers' dollars would donate those money to a worthy cause, causes like Wounded Warriors and others that are specifically earmarked for the men and women who are serving our nation in uniform. I do want to also point out again, there's a lot of good things that professional sports do to honor the men and women who serve in the military. But these millions of dollars are not acceptable as expenditure of taxpayers' dollars. Questions?
Senator, did any of the service members have any idea that when they were being paid tribute to from an arena full of fans, that there was this sort of transaction to pay for that salute?
I've only talked to a few of them, but the ones that we've talked to and heard from, obviously they did not know that their appearances were being used in a way that would monetarily benefit the teams that were sponsoring the events and them.
What's, I mean, a lot of people see these events, they're often televised, sometimes nationally. What's the big deal with this being a way for the military to showcase what it's all about? It seems like an advertising budget issue.
Well, maybe it seems that way to you. I don't think it seems that way to the American people, that when you honor the men and women who are serving and for their sacrifice, that you should be paid for that. It's really not more complicated than that. Go ahead.
Let me just say, in terms of sports marketing, there's a lot that goes into that. It's, I think, a $53 million budget overall. And a lot of that is to set up a tent, a recruitment tent, or to do other activities that I don't think either of us have a problem with. You have to go where the recruits or potential recruits are. What we take issue with are those items where the average fan going to a game assumes is being done because these teams care about the military. And like I said, a lot of that the bulk of it is done as one would expect. But then when you find specific contracts outlining some of these activities that are being compensated for, then there's a problem.
How long have these events been sponsored by taxpayer money? How long has this been going on for, or what?
Well, we have contracts going back to FY12. Is that it? That's there. It may have been before that, but that's what we have back to.
So this $6.8 million, this doesn't include things like banners that say, you know, join the Army, for example. This is just presentations on the field or that sort of thing?
It might. There's about 53, or no, more than that, 90-some million dollars for sports marketing generally, which would include a lot of the things you're talking about. $6.8 million in contracts included some of the items that we're talking about. So not all of that $6.8 million was spent on these paid-for patriotism items, but that's the value of the contracts that included some of these items.
Did you find any Arizona teams, and if so, which ones?
If you look at the report, I think there's some in there. So we've included everyone who had anything.
Senator McCain, do you expect to have any kind of follow-up oversight hearings on this?
I don't think we need to. The leagues have pledged not to continue, and perhaps more importantly, it's now, as soon as the president signs the Defense Authorization Act into law, it'll be prohibited.
Let me just say one thing as well, in terms of the owners and who knew. And I've talked to a couple of the owners since then who had no idea this was going on. I'm sure a lot of the management, the teams, didn't know either. It was the marketing people, likely, who entered into these contracts. And so we're not placing blame necessarily on the teams at all, but the Department of Defense certainly should know better than to do this.
Have the leagues made any promise to donate some of this money to worthy causes as you've requested?
They have not yet, but they have certainly pledged that they would make sure that this kind of practice didn't continue. We are recommending that those funds, at least some of them, be given to the kinds of causes that help our wounded warriors and other veterans' causes.
I should say the NFL has said that they will conduct an audit, and if they find that there was items that was paid for patriotism, then they will make good. Is that correct?
And again, I want to point out that since this has become known, there has been a large degree of cooperation from the various organizations, like such as the NFL and organized ML, Major League Baseball, and others. They have been cooperating. The DOD is the one we had problem, one, getting the information from, and two, acknowledging that this is a practice that they should not have engaged in.
Senator, in the report, it includes the possibility that this money could have gone towards those homecoming reunions, those tearful homecoming reunions. Did you actually come across any instances where that actually happened, where there were homecoming reunions that were paid for with taxpayer money?
Say it.
There, in the contracts, there were a number of there was definitely a welcome home promotion on one of the contracts that said, will meet a player at the airport or at his home with his family. It's in the report, and it'll be videotaped and and shared on social media.
Um,
So the answer is yes.
All right, and then secondly, you said that you kind of you didn't want to place blame on the teams, and it was more, on the Department of Defense. But I mean, you also seem to say that it's inappropriate for the teams to be taking money for these situations in the first place.
Well, let me clarify. Many of the owners and even team management didn't know, but they should have known. They should have known that this was going on. It doesn't remove them all responsibility from them. And maybe at some point someone should have said, by the way, are we paying for, are we getting paid for these events? So I appreciate the degree of cooperation. I appreciate the pledges of this never happening again, but we're all responsible, particularly when you own a team, then you're responsible for what the team does.
I wanted to follow up with Senator Flake. You had mentioned that you've spoken with some of the owners. Have they said that they'll continue to put on these type of events without compensation?
Oh, you bet. I mean, they were doing before, they'll do after. Some of them pointed out that this is a tiny fraction of the activities that they do, and it's true. I mean, all of us have been going to these games for years and have been seeing this. It's upsetting when we find out that the taxpayer is paying for some of them.
It's a tiny fraction, but it's still in the millions.
Yes, go ahead.
Yeah, I was just wondering if you could tell us again how you guys became aware of this. You mentioned you learned of a New York Jets contract. How did you guys, did a whistleblower come to you, or how did you hear about this?
In my office, we put out something called Pork Chops, a weekly kind of skewering of wasteful spending. And it was around the time of the NFL draft, and we thought, well, we always try to pick some timely activity to tie it to some corny, release that you've probably all received. But we came across, I'm not throwing my office under the bus. Some of those corny things are mine. But anyway, we came across a contract with the New York Jets had with the National Guard, New Jersey National Guard. And so we called them about it, and we were asked what an Arizona senator wanted to know about what the New Jersey National Guard was doing. I think that's rude even in New Jersey to say that. No. So anyway, we followed it, and then figured what else is going on out there. Senator McCain's office was already looking at this and found some other contracts, and we went from there.
And I want to emphasize again, the Department of Defense was unusually and especially aggressive in trying to withhold this information from us.
Senator, when you make that point, which you've done a couple of times, do you get a sense that there was an awareness that monetizing tributes to service members was deeply offensive, or do you think this was someone or a group of people who thought recruitment needs a more creative angle and this is something that would get people's attention?
I think it was a practice that sort of crept up. We see every year it became more prevalent, but I also think that they knew that it would be a source of embarrassment for them. And it's not the first time we've had difficulty getting information from the Department of Defense. But in this case, it was a degree frustrating. Yes?
Have either of you talked to the Arizona Diamondbacks?
Yes. Yeah, there was, I think, a small item there. You'll see it in the report, but we wanted to include everything that was there. So, let me just second what Senator McCain said. I think it was a source of embarrassment for DOD, because some of these activities involved basically a pat on the back to the military or an appreciation, ceremony, and to find out or to have people know that that was paid for just doesn't sit very well.
What do you think about the motive, though? Why would they offer that for sale?
It's hard to figure, especially when you look at the incomes of some of these professional sports. It's something that we don't understand, and we are glad that it's going to come to a halt.
And let me say, from the team's perspective, a lot will point out that these items were just an add-on to the marketing contract that included the credible issues, setting up a tent or doing other things. And in many cases, it probably was. But in some cases, it was specifically spelled out in the contract, this is what needs to happen. And so that's what we have a problem with.
I know when you first kind of started going to the DOD about this, there was a question of whether this was a DOD policy or whether the National Guard from the state level had kind of gone through their own advertising ideas and this was something that kind of cropped up all over the country. Have you learned anything more about whether this was a broader policy or whether this was something that just individual state guards went to?
It was, frankly, both. A lot of it was initiated, I think, by the National Guards at the state level, but some of these contracts are with the Air Force, not the reserves, and so I think it's a combination.
All right, yes.
You said the Defense Department wasn't unusually, they weren't as cooperative or unusually uncooperative.
They're still not.
What specifically, I guess, what kind of barriers or obstacles did you have to overcome in order to get this documentation?
Well, among other things, they gave us partial information that our staffs, our respective staffs, had to go through a lot of records and dig up contracts that they refused to acknowledge. 2, they delayed whatever information they could provide us with as long as possible. And 3, continued to discount the importance of the whole situation.
Yeah, in our case, I'm not the chairman of SASC, so I have a little more difficulty with getting information there. They told us to wait until March of next year before we got information. We were able to push, but you'll see, I believe, in the packet that you'll get will be the correspondence that we had, and it took a long time.
There's a reference in the report to a GAO report or study that's ongoing. Do you know, was that something that you initiated, or what that is? Is that going to touch on the same issues? Do you know anything more about that?
I don't know that.
I don't. GAO usually tells us when they're doing something like that. I don't know.
If the $6.8 million isn't entirely for these types of activities, do you know exactly how much these activities cost?
We don't have a total. It would be difficult in some cases to determine, but that's a value of the contracts that included some of these activities.
Nor do we know if we have the complete story, given the recalcitrance of the Department of Defense. Thank you all very much. Thank you. Thank you. Up the Irish.